Ay, coming in, yeah. Flex, I just wanna win, yeah. LABB, who we running with, yeah. 223.
Hey guys, it's Julia. Welcome back to my channel. So today's video idea is one that came to me at about 11:30 p.m., which is when my best ideas come.
Okay.
And I recently did another kind of like hypothetical makeup challenge, which was if my entire makeup collection disappeared, what I would repurchase first. But today's hypothetical is a little bit more feasible because, well, my entire makeup collection isn't in any danger of suddenly disappearing. I have been trying to downsize a lot lately, and I have been decluttering quite a bit. So I'm actually going to be putting up a video very soon of the latest victims of my recent decluttering. And I just recently did a big eyeshadow palette declutter, I think last month. So in the spirit of those two things, I wanted to go through my entire palette collection and think of the brands that I have more than one palette from. If I had to get rid of one palette from each brand, which one would I get rid of? This was very fun for me to think about because for some of them I was like really surprised with how easy the decision was, and then with some of them I was like thinking about it for hours. But I'm going to be going through the 10 brands that I own more than one palette from and talking about which palette that I currently have that I would declutter. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Full details of this look should already be on Instagram. I am wearing my yellow Dewy Merch t-shirt and I hope you guys enjoyed this one. So without further ado, let's get into it. The agony. Starting off with one of my favorite brands and probably one of my favorite eyeshadow palette discoveries of 2019, Lunar Beauty. I'm a huge fan of Lunar Beauty and the work they've done so far. I think Manny's doing a really amazing job with not only the branding and the aesthetic of his products, but the formulas are really good as well. And I just think you can tell how much care he puts into these launches. So I really enjoy my Lunar Beauty palettes. I have the Strawberry Dream palette, which is the first one that I got from them. So much more beautiful in person than it could ever be on camera or in pictures. The vibrancy of these mattes as well as the finishes of the shimmers in here just really are so different from anything I have in my collection. The strawberry scent has faded a lot from these shadows, so I wouldn't say that this is quite as potent as like the Too Faced like peach palette or anything, but this has become like one of my favorite formulas, and this is really the palette that got me to fall in love with Lunar Beauty. So I've done quite a few different looks with this one. Because there's so many different shades in here, I think you can really do a lot with this palette, but I do love my pink tone, so this one is a huge favorite in my collection. Then I have their Holiday 2019 palette, which was the Moonspell palette. I really feel like these two palettes kind of just embody both of my warring aesthetics. Like this is my woo side, and this is my kind of like dark magic on my way to burn your house down side. You can just tell I'm a Gemini. Duality of man. Anyways, the Moonspell palette I think was probably the most fun holiday palette to come out last year. Color scheme is obviously like so different from what you would expect from a typical holiday palette. And honestly, it is one of the most unique color stories in my collection. I particularly love this row down here with the kind of like mossy greens and bluish shades. And again, because of the variety in here, I feel like you can really get a ton of different looks with this one. However, of the two, I did decide that the Moonspell would be the one that I would declutter, albeit very unhappily, but I really do prefer the Strawberry Dream for a couple different reasons. One, I do feel like the Strawberry Dream formula is a little bit better than the Moonspell, not because it's a different formula by any means. I would just say that they chose harder shades to get right in this palette. So for example, this matte purple up here really does not have that smooth and like creamy blendable formula that the pinks in here do. And then with a few of these mattes, I do feel like you have to build them up a little bit more to get a lot of color payoff, whereas because the Strawberry Dream palette is just more vibrant in general, I feel like you really don't have to do as much work with these ones. But sometimes it almost feels like they did a little bit too much with this one, whereas I feel like the Strawberry Dream, even though you have like the blues in there, I do think it still like all makes sense together, and you can really just come up with a bunch of different color combinations. So Strawberry Dream does win out a tiny bit for me. Also, it's important to note that Strawberry Dream is a little bit thinner, so it's just easier to store, less bulky than this book one. But that is very much a scenario if I had to get rid of one palette from Lunar Beauty. I definitely still want to keep both of them for the time being, but Strawberry Dream does get a lot more use in my collection. I currently own 6 palettes from Anastasia Beverly Hills. I've decluttered in the past 2 palettes from them. So I previously owned both the Prism and the Riviera, but I have since decluttered those ones. And I used to kind of define myself as an ABH collector, but now I don't do that because I'm not crazy. So currently I have my Master Palette by Mario, which is one of my favorites. Unfortunately discontinued. I do think that the color story itself is pretty dupable, but the formula is like on a league of its own. I think this is honestly even better than the current Anastasia formula. My Modern Renaissance palette. I love Modern Renaissance so much, and it's definitely my most used palette in my collection right now. Subculture, this is my original problematic formula, but I love it so much. Probably of my entire collection, the one that I reach for the least, just because I have to be in a certain like mood or certain like level of tolerability to reach for this one, just because it does require a little bit more attention and a little bit more like effort to put into the eye look, whereas like something like Modern Renaissance is just very effortless. Like you don't really have to put a lot of thought into the eye look you're doing. I have my Norvina palette from the Anastasia line. This I really love for its shimmers. I feel like the shimmers are really just dimensional and very foiled, whereas the Modern Renaissance palette, I think you can probably tell just by appearance that the shimmers are a little bit more on the soft side and less dimensional, whereas these are like crazy, so I love these ones a lot. Obviously I have Soft Glam, and this one is probably my favorite of my entire Anastasia collection, just because I really feel like this is one of the few palettes in my collection where I literally would not change a single color in here. Like I wouldn't change a thing. This is perfection. So if you want to see a video talking about like palettes where I wouldn't change a single color or a single thing about them, I could maybe do that. I don't know if there would be a ton of palettes to talk about just because I'm extremely picky, but this would definitely be in there, so yeah. And then of course I have my beloved Jackie Aina palette. This is my most recent one. This was probably my favorite palette of 2019 that I tried out that year, and I never get tired of reaching for this one. I just feel like there's so many different things you can do in here, and I just genuinely enjoy working with this palette a lot. So obviously I love each of my ABH palettes for very different reasons. So again, I wouldn't really want to get rid of any of them, but thinking realistically, the one that I think I would probably declutter first would be the Norvina palette. As I said, the shimmers in here are really special to me. I mostly keep this one around for the shimmers, honestly. The mattes in here are nice, but tonally they're not really what I go for like my more neutral looks, and to me this is a very neutral palette with a pop of purple rather than like a purple palette. So if I was gonna do kind of like a pinky slash berry toned neutral look, I would probably go for the Modern Renaissance before reaching for the Norvina palette. I'm more so reaching to here when I'm using another palette for the crease and I want a really special thing to put on my lid. But if I needed to, I could probably get rid of this one without missing it too much. So of my current collection of ABH, I would probably declutter Norvina first. But right now I am pretty happy with my ABH collection, and I don't think I would declutter this at the moment because I do still get use out of it. Alright, so,
child. Anyway, so
I'm not a stan of any makeup brands, but I think I'm as close as you can get to be a stan without being an actual stan of Mel Cosmetics. I currently own 3 of their eyeshadow palettes, and I used to own one of their stacks, but I have since decluttered that one. I do prefer their palette formula a lot more. Gemini was my first palette from them, and this for me is like everything. It's basically a Mina palette. We've got the grungy tone neutrals as well as the olive greens. I really like the formula in here a lot. The only downside for me would be that it's like too fragile to take with me traveling. But besides that, I legitimately just love reaching for this one. It's such a joy to work with and just inspires me to no end. So Gemini is probably my favorite palette from them. The next palette that I bought from Melt was Smoke Sessions, and this I bought mostly to kind of use in conjunction with the Gemini palette just because it's very much a shimmer dominated palette. There are 2 very dark mattes in here, so it's really hard to do like standalone looks with just this palette. I also really like that it's half olive greens and then half kind of like minty cooler tone greens, so you kind of get that, again, like dichotomy. And then the formula in here is incredible, especially for shades that I feel like are very difficult to formulate. In my eyeshadow palette declutter video that I did recently, I put this one on palette probation just because I haven't really reached for it that much. But I've kind of realized that the reason I don't reach for this one as much is not because I don't like this one and not because I want to declutter this one, but just because of the palette that it is. It doesn't really have that many standalone uses unless I'm doing a very like dark or single monochromatic look. But when I do make an effort to remember to reach for this one, I really do enjoy working with it. And then the palette that I'm wearing on my eyes right now is the Melt Vita palette, and this is so different from the other 2 Melt palettes that I own. Smoke Sessions and Gemini are very grungy but colorful, whereas this is pure vibrancy and just straight vibes, summer vibes, dude.
Vibes, dude. Vibes, summer vibes, dude.
So right now I'm wearing these 4 shades down here on my eyes. Papel Picado is the main like green crease shade that you see in my eyes. Then I have Sarape all over the lid. Amor Eterno on the very inner corner, and then smoked out on the outer edge is kind of like an olive green, like wingy accent, is Agua Ardiente. So I really love working with this palette a lot, and I was very pleasantly surprised with the formula, having not tried any brights from Melt before. But yeah, those are my current Melt palettes, and if I had to declutter one of them, it would probably be Smoke Sessions. Again, not that I don't love this one, it's just that I really don't reach for it very often. I don't really like completely dark eye looks on myself, so I don't reach for this one as a standalone palette. And then where I'm doing looks where I would use one of these shades on the lid or within the look, I don't typically remember because I usually do prefer using just one palette for an eye look. So right now this one is still kind of on palette probation, and if I don't use it within the next couple months, I might declutter it, but it does give me a lot of joy to have in my collection. I do think it's just a beautiful palette. So this one I would declutter, and it would kind of hurt, but I do think it would be a good decision. Maybe. I don't know. And then the brand that I own the most palettes from is Colourpop, of course. I've owned over time probably like 3 times this amount that I currently have right now, but I've decluttered quite a few different Colourpop palettes over my makeup career, I don't know. And currently I have 7, but that is actually going to change soon, and you'll see. So I have 3 little monochromatic square palettes from them. Just My Luck, which is the green monochromatic palette. I think these are some of the best green eyeshadows and really, really well formulated, which is very hard to find in these typical types of green shades. So even though I haven't done a look with this in a while, I'm really excited to get to this one in my palette series. I have the Honey palette, which is all yellows, monochromatic again. This I love. These are some of my favorite yellow eyeshadows in my collection, and I didn't really know how they were going to create a yellow monochromatic palette without having it be like all the same shade, but they pulled this off really, really well in my opinion. So I love this one a lot as well. And then I have the Blush Crush palette from earlier this year. This is an all kind of like blush mauve tone neutrals palette. I really, really enjoyed doing some like Valentine's Day looks and just kind of softer glams with this one. Kind of like Modern Renaissance. It's one of those palettes where I don't really have to put a ton of effort into doing the eye look. And I just don't have to think with this one. It's very effortless and very easy. I have 2 cardboard 12 pan palettes from them. So I have my Good Sport palette, which is a little bit different. Unfortunately has been discontinued, but this one was one of my favorite kind of grungy toned, very unique color stories in my collection. And I also have the Sweet Talk palette, which is a really beautiful kind of like peachy toned neutrals palette, which I don't have a ton of in my collection. I'm not a huge fan of the 2 pressed glitters in here, so I don't really use these 2 shades, but everything else in here I think just makes for a really beautiful color story, and particularly for spring summer I think this is a really gorgeous color story. I have the Through My Eyes palette. This is by far the most underrated palette that Colourpop has ever come out with, and like dead ass one of my favorite things I have in my collection. Kind of reminds me a lot of the Jackie Aina palette, just because you have so many different things you can do in here. You have neutrals obviously, but then you also have these really well integrated, like very bright colorful shades that you can really do either mixed eye looks with or just like pure beautiful colorful eye looks. So you have a big mirror in here. I think this is truly one of the best palettes I've ever come out with. And then my most recent Colourpop palette, and probably one of the most sought after ones right now, is the Mulan palette. I really, really loved this entire collection, but I think the palette was one of the biggest standouts for me. I don't have a ton of cool tone neutrals in my collection, so this was already adding something very interesting to my collection, but the really intense, very textured neutral shades in here reminded me a lot of the Tati Beauty palette, which I wouldn't buy for myself, but I think this is a really great alternative and just brings something very different to my collection. So of these palettes, it was pretty difficult for me to select the one that I would get rid of, but I decided on the Good Sport palette for a couple different reasons. Number one, again, this is very much a personal preference thing, but I've really found myself not loving the way darker eye looks look on me, and as much as I really enjoy this grungy color story all over, it's a discontinued palette, so I can't really talk about it or recommend it as much as I would like to, and B, I have Subculture, and I feel like this fills a really similar niche to Subculture, so I could probably just do with owning Subculture and not needing this one. I do love my Colourpop family, but this one would probably be the first to go. I've been very outspoken about the fact that I think that Huda's bigger palettes are far superior to her smaller ones, and over time I've owned 4 of her Obsessions palettes, which are those mini 9-pan palettes for $27 that are in the Sephora checkout line. I have the Emerald, Amethyst, Sapphire, and the Neon Green one. I've since decluttered the Emerald, Sapphire, and Neon Green, and then I gave the purple one to my mom. So I now own 2 big palettes from Huda Beauty. Desert Dusk was actually the first thing that I ever tried from Huda's makeup line, so this palette does hold a very special place in my heart. I also really fell very hard for this one because it was so difficult to get. I remember this palette being so incredibly popular when it first came out that it was constantly sold out, and I can definitely see why. This reminds me a lot of like Modern Renaissance with a kind of pop of purples. It also kind of reminds me of the Colored Rain Queen of Hearts palette a lot. You can do really beautiful like warm tone neutral looks as well as some really beautiful warm toned vaguely colorful looks. The duochromes and shimmers in here I think are really a standout formula, and overall just made me fall in love with the Huda Beauty formula in general. And then the new nude palette is something I define as like Instagram famous just because it's such a beautiful palette to look at. It was definitely made with like being photographed in mind, but this is also probably one of my top maybe 5 favorite palettes in my collection. You guys know I really enjoy my pinky tone neutrals, but I think the shimmers in here are just on another level, even better than the ones in the Desert Dusk palette, which is saying a lot because this is one of my favorite shimmer formulas. And in the matte formula, even though I love the formula in the Desert Dusk, I think the mattes in here are just so good. Even though I don't think that any palette is worth $65, I think all makeup is severely marked up and kind of ridiculous. I do think that this really does pack a lot of punch. I love this palette so much I can even excuse the presence of pressed glitters, which are the bane of my existence. So for me, this was definitely not a hard decision. I would get rid of the Desert Dusk in a heartbeat before I ever got rid of New Nude. That's not to say I don't love the Desert Dusk. It definitely had its moment in my collection, and I definitely loved the looks I got out of this one. But I think for me, the general thrill of owning this one has passed a lot. And while I do think that the formula is amazing, I do have other palettes I reach for over this one to get a kind of similar effect, if that makes sense. The prospect of decluttering either of my Nabla palettes,
that's so upsetting.
I really, really love my two currently existing Nabla palettes. I haven't tried any other palettes from them, so I can't really speak to the quality of other ones from them. But Dreamy and Soul Blooming, they just spark joy, man. I don't know what to say. Dreamy is just gorgeous. Slightly reminds me of like Modern Renaissance and Norvina rolled into one. Rose golds just tend to be one of my favorite color schemes, so I really, really enjoy working with this one. So Dreamy is very dreamy, but Soul Blooming. I'm sorry, but what? What do you mean? We've got the rose gold in here, so you can definitely do the same kind of rose gold neutral looks that you would do with Dreamy. But there's also this stunning periwinkle down here, which just makes me so happy when I see it. So Soul Blooming for me is probably the one that I would keep. I would get rid of the Dreamy palette, not because I don't like this one, and obviously in a non-hypothetical situation, I'm keeping both of them and you can pry them from my cold, dead, crumbling hands. But Dreamy is a bit of a catfish just because this purple shade up here, Delirium, which is kind of like the eye-catching showstopper shade in the palette, is complete and total ass. Like, this is not good. This formula is so crumbly, really, really not fun to work with, and it was definitely one of the shades I was most excited about in the palette. So even though I do love the rest of it and do love working with this one, for that reason, I would definitely go for the Soul Blooming over Dreamy. Next up are my beloved Alter Ego palettes. I still have a code with them. I never talk about it for some reason because I don't actually make money from the code. It's just for you guys. I believe it's Julia 10, but I'm not sure. I'll have it like listed down below. But yeah, these are both dupes of ND palettes, so consider this kind of an Alter Ego slash if I own the ND palettes, what I would declutter. But I have my Goddess palette, and this is the palette that really just made me fall in love with Alter Ego in general. This is beautiful, probably one of my favorite shimmer formulas in my collection, just because a lot of these shimmers in here have a kind of interesting duochrome flip, which makes them stand out a lot on the eyes, especially because this is a more neutral palette in general. I love doing like all neutral looks, but having something unique on the lid to make people kind of do a double take. It allows you to have this kind of very wearable eye look that still has a little bit of like interesting appeal to it. So Goddess was my first palette from them, and then I have the Aurora palette as well. And this is beautiful. If you are a warm tones lover, I think this will be your dream palette. I particularly love like this half. If this was like a 9-pan palette, I would buy that in a heartbeat. For me, while the shimmers in the Goddess palette really stand out to me, the mattes in here are just insane. Yellow in here is really good. This kind of like Cheeto orange called Soul is really good, and then the berry tone shades are awesome. I've really enjoyed all the eye looks I've done with this one as well. So for me, this was a pretty big toss-up, but I decided I would keep the Goddess palette and declutter Aurora. And that's simply because I feel like I have a lot of shades in my collection that could replicate the eye looks I get with this one. But if I didn't have shadows that could dupe this one, or if I didn't have as big of a collection, I would definitely keep this palette. But yeah, I do love my Alter Ego palettes a lot. This brand was by far the hardest to select for, my Kaleidos palettes. To think about even decluttering one of these.
You want to know what? No, I am gonna leave.
This brand is everything to me. I love them so much. I love what they're doing. All of their releases have been so well thought out, so unique and different from anything in the makeup world, and their Futurism palettes are one of my favorite discoveries of last year. So I have my Futurism 3 Astro Pink palette, which is such a unique, cool toned color story. I don't have anything like this in my collection. I have the Futurism 4 VR Neon, which is this beautiful tropical neon color story. This, again, so fun for summer. I can't wait to break this one out more. And then one of the most unique color stories in my collection is the Futurism 5 Electric Turquoise. This, wow. 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 Of these three, it was very difficult for me to select. I have owned all of the Kaleidos palettes that they've ever come out with. So I had the Futurism 1 and 2. I have since given those away to people because I felt like I had similar shades. So these ones that I've kept are like everything to me. The one I decided I would get rid of is the VR Neon palette, and this is only on a technicality. I love this palette so much, but I would probably get rid of this one because I feel like it's very similar to my Melt Vita palette. I actually compared this one and the Vita palette in a dupes video, and I felt like they were very similar, at least in what they can create. The only thing you really don't have are the two shimmers, but the mattes I feel like you can replicate from the Vita palette. So I wouldn't do it happily, but this is the one I would declutter if I had to declutter at gunpoint one of my Kaleidos palettes. But the point is, I wouldn't do it. 2 more brands left. First up is Urban Decay, and I have 2 palettes from Urban Decay right now. I have my Naked Heat, which is beautiful. One of the oldest palettes in my collection by far. This is, like, I got this, I think the month that it launched, so in, like, 2017. But it's fine, because I don't believe that eyeshadow palettes have an expiration date.
She's trash. I'm not talking about that girl.
This palette. Well, I don't reach for her as much as I would like to, just because I have so many warm tone neutrals in my collection. Whenever I use this one, I'm like reminded of, oh my god, this palette slaps. This is like one of the few things that makes me not give up on Urban Decay as a brand. That is until Naked Honey came along, and she has stolen my heart. I love this palette so much, especially as someone who uses neutrals on a daily basis. This, for me, gives me everything I want to create these kind of like mustardy, grungy tone neutral looks with just a hint of yellowness in there. I think this color story really brings out my skin tone very well, and I think the formula in here is amazing. So of these 2 palettes, while I do love both of them, Naked Honey was the clear choice to keep. Naked Heat I love, but it's very dupeable, I feel. This just like fills a different niche I didn't even realize I had in my collection. So again, while I love both of these, Naked Heat would definitely go. Last but not least, my 2 remaining palettes from the Nickelback of the makeup community. These are also 2 of my biggest palettes in my collection. So the Morphe Jaclyn Hill palette from the original launch in the original formula. I do still use this one a lot, and I do still love this one. You can't really buy this formula anymore, which sucks, because this original formula was like balls to the walls amazing. So while you can still get the equivalent color story, I don't think the formula is anywhere near as amazing as it used to be. And then in my Morphe and James Charles palette, this is a staple in my collection. It seems like something I wouldn't like just because I hate big palettes, and B, I think rainbow color stories are just very blah. Having this entire spectrum of colors is so important to me to do basically any eye look that I would need to do for a more artistic look. Plus, it doesn't hurt that the formula is really, really good. I think this is probably the best formula you can get for colorful eyeshadows. So for those reasons, this one is the clear keeper in my collection. I would be decluttering the Jaclyn Hill palette. Honestly, it's not the most unique color story anymore. I do feel like there are a lot of things I could replicate the looks I get out of this one, but I do really love this old formula. The reason I'd be decluttering this one is because this is like an actual need in my collection, whereas this is just a want. And that is it. Those are the palettes I would declutter from each brand if I had to. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. This was a very fun video for me to make just because I've never like thought about each brand like that, but it was definitely helpful for me to see how quickly I was able to make decisions on things and to kind of rationalize decluttering things before I even considered decluttering them. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe down below and see my face on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. And if you made it to the very end of this video, you get the bonus meme. Love you. Bye.
No!